Greetings to everyone on today's second video. Thank you for your support. Let's get started. Story 1 from user deleted. Guy in his 20s came in complaining of belly button problem. I examined him. He had an irritated scab inside the belly button caused by aggressive lint picking. But dude was sweaty and had a slight tremor. Looked like crap. When I asked how he was feeling overall, he said, "Oh, okay, I guess. Just a little tired, drank a little more this week than usual. Probably overdid it." I had to pry for details, and turns out he drank a gallon of gin over the last 3 days and stopped drinking alcohol when he started vomiting large amounts of blood and pooping a mixture of bright red blood and dark sticky stuff, melena digested blood. He was totally unaware of the fact that he was going through alcohol withdrawal, sweating, shaking, because he hadn't stopped drinking long enough in recent memory to experience symptoms. I sent him straight to the emergency room, where they found a tear in his esophagus that required immediate intervention, and he was admitted for inpatient alcohol detox. I read his hospital note. He still insisted that the ED doc examine his belly button. Story 2 from user Sutuanjoy. 50-ish-year-old man who came in for chronic issue follow-up. He brought his wife with him this time around. At the end of the visit, she says, "Hey, tell the doc about that thing you can do." He turns to me proudly and tells me that he can whistle from his penis. If he really pushed, he could blow gas from it. His wife insisted it wasn't normal, but he was certain most guys could. Turns out, he had a connection between his bowel and his bladder. Mom brings her kid in because the babysitter was concerned about these spells the child would have. Apparently, the child would have episodes where he would just blankly stare at them and not acknowledge whatever it is they were telling him, or whatever he was doing. The parents just thought he was being an asshole and not listening to them, or being absent-minded. Kid turned out to be having absent seizures. A younger gal who had come in for generalized abdominal pain that she experienced on and off for years, but just always wrote off to either menstrual cramps or bad food or life. We had asked her if her bowel movements were regular, and she said yes. At some point, someone was sharp enough to ask her how often she had bowel movements, to which she said, about once every 2 to 3 weeks. She had been suffering from pretty severe constipation, but just thought it was normal to have BMs once to twice a month. I'm sure I have more, but I think I wrote enough for now. Ninja edit. Oh yeah, I have a lot of stories involving skin lesions. Please people, no doctor will ever fault you for wanting to just get something looked at. There are a few easy ways to tell if you're looking at something potentially evil. Gotta amend the above edit due to people's bad experiences. No decent doctor should blow you off if you're concerned about a skin lesion. They should at least take the time to discuss why it is they're not worried about a lesion, if it's not concerning. Story 3 from user Sleepy Hollow 101. I was the patient. When I was growing up, I had constant stomach aches. Every time I ate, I'd get sick. I went to the doctor multiple times for it, but they could never figure out what was wrong. Eventually, I started to think that everyone lives with pain like that, and I was just being a wimp and couldn't deal with it. I barely ate, such that I was super underweight. I was miserable all the time. I was constantly stressed and depressed because of this problem. Fast forward to grad school. My first year is in China. I'm there for a few months, and then, over time, my symptoms disappear. I don't have stomach aches anymore. I gain about 40 pounds, seemingly overnight. Now I'm at a healthy, doctor-approved weight. My depressive symptoms disappear almost entirely. But how could that happen? What could have caused such a change? Turns out, I'm lactose intolerant. I grew up in the Midwest where pretty much everything has dairy in it, and I'd been eating it constantly for so long, it took months for my system to reset. Being in China where dairy isn't such a staple made all the difference. I felt like such an unwise when I realized that was what was making me ill. On the plus side, I feel better, look better, and am a much happier person now. Story 4 from user The Albatross Vi. When I was young, I had an overbite that needed to be corrected by my orthodontist. He gave me the option to use headgear at night for a few years, or use what they call a Herbst device. After deliberating with the family, we decided I would go with the Herbst device, as it would only take 1 year to correct the overbite. So, I lived with this thing in my mouth for 1 year, and it sucked. Every facet of it sucked. My bottom jaw was covered with a plastic plate, and rods pushed my jaw forward. Finally, the day came when they were to remove the device. I think anyone who's had braces can relate to the feeling of impending oral freedom and the excitement therein. They removed the plate and the rods, but left the palate expander in because it had not yet reached the development they were looking for. This is a good time to mention the rods were attached to my palate expander with screws, and the bottom half of the rods were attached with screws to my bottom molars. After a couple of weeks, I started to lose weight and hardly talk. I didn't want to talk because my mouth hurt too badly. I thought it was normal after having a procedure like this. They chiseled cement from my bottom teeth under the plate and nicked up my cheeks and gums as a result. One night at dinner, my mom got frustrated by the fact that I wouldn't speak. I'd only nod or shake my head or barely open my mouth to let an easy word or two slip out. She asked to look into my mouth and found that they never removed the screws that the rods were attached to. The screws had buried themselves into my cheeks, and every time I'd eat or speak, the screws would pull and slip off of my cheeks. The ortho saw me the next days and removed them. I still have 4 scars in my mouth. Ortho told me that they'd almost gotten through my cheeks. Story 5 from user Bloated Baryonyx. I was the patient. My parents rushed me to A&E because I'd taken something like 18 paracetamol tablets in less than 24 hours. I'd read stories online about people who'd destroy themselves that way, either intentionally or not. I wasn't censored or anything, my stomach just hurt really bad that day, and I kept falling asleep so it was hard to keep track of time. When I say bad, I mean absolute agony. I couldn't move, I was vomiting everything up. Paracetamol barely puts a dent in it sort of pain. I figured this was normal pain for getting stomach cramps, i.e. from bad food. I got them a lot, to some extent every day, but the severity varied wildly. I figured I was just a complete wimp about normal levels of pain. I'd gone to doctors previously, but every time I'd been told that this was heartburn. A few times it was apparently because I had a test later in the week. Anyway, they take some bloods, and it turns out that I had pancreatitis, and I've had this same condition pretty much every time the pain got so severe I had trouble staying awake. The doctors at the pediatric A&E just didn't want to take my bloods for whatever reason. Story 6 from user Deleted. I didn't know how much more often I cried than the average person. Average is 1 to 5 a month. As a kid, up until I was 18-19, I cried on average 3 to 6 a week. Apparently, none of my teachers, parents, therapists, or counselors noticed that it was out of the ordinary for a child to cry themselves to sleep most nights, or just burst into tears in the middle of class. It led to a lot of bullying and other stuff, and now I'm not sure I've ever been 100% depression-free. I also thought it was normal to have mental breakdowns often, like once a day, near daily screaming, breaking things, hitting, injuring yourself, dissociating, honestly terrified of yourself, and being alone. Insomnia, brain actually hurts from how trash your thoughts are, etc. I grew out of some of it and learned how to keep most of it behind closed doors, but I still have breakdowns a couple times a month. Some weeks, for instance, the last few, I'll have one daily or more. Turns out that them just rolling their eyes at my breakdowns when I was a kid might have been neglect. The first time I broke down in front of a therapist, not even a bad episode for me, she recommended hospitalization. And also she quit as my therapist. Anyways, yeah, it's been getting worse again. Much worse. But at least now I know it's not a normal thing people go through. Story 7 from user John6. I guess I'm the patient. I had epilepsy when I was young, put on carbamazepine. I was on that for 8 to 9 years at a very high dose. Simply the NHS forgot I was on it and kept prescribing it. A doctor eventually took me off it. I had to wean off it for a fair while. The nub is when I was young, I had an excellent memory. I could remember the most minutest detail. My family sometimes told me I was a memory bank. After that point, my memory is shockingly bad, like entire long chunks of time just gone. For example, I did a project at work about a year ago which took a long time. Someone logged a bug on my code, zero memory of my ever producing it. I thought it was a normal thing, just getting old. I think I asked a question on here, but the upshot was, go get it checked out. My girl at the time was particularly vocal about it, demanding that my memory problems were not normal. I figured out there were times where I was doing something but had no idea what was going on, but remained perfectly fine. We would have conversations and I'd have no idea what we were discussing. I'd remember events totally out of order in terms of sequence, or completely wrong, i.e., conversations with multiple people who couldn't possibly have been there. Lots of things. I went for EEGs, discussed my absences, how I usually remember things by attributing certain facts to some sort of number trick which I wasn't really conscious of. I just did it. Realized that I would do things, e.g. a date, and remember nothing of it. This isn't constant, it's just random. I also get sleep paralysis and the rest of it. While this sounds horrific, it's not too bad. I have tea, but I don't view it as life unlivable. Just sometimes I won't remember things, even with heavy prompting. I was offered a control drug, but I declined as I don't think I'm bad enough. It doesn't irritate me enough to do it. I just live by my wall calendar, a couple of notepad.txt files on my computer, and that does me fine. Story 8 from user Squidshay. These are all pretty common, but it's happened to me 3 times. First was when I was in about 10th grade and had been having my period for about 2 years. I didn't realize that I wasn't supposed to be completely debilitated for a week each month. Uncontrollable vomiting and diarrhea, passing out from the pain, not being able to move, etc. The day my mother finally took me to the doctor was after I had missed a few days of school and went back, only to have her pick me up early. I clearly remember walking down the stairwell to HE office and having to sit down BC I could move. The pain was so bad, and I was afraid of fainting. When I finally got to the car, I was curled up in a fetal position and eventually blacked out. She made me an appointment that day, and since being put on birth control, I've had almost no issues. Next 2 were pretty recent. I'm a psychology major about to graduate, and I still didn't realize I was suffering from depression and severe anxiety. I had been having a hard time coping with a huge amount of stress stemming from a few situations that happened this semester, and decided to see a counselor on campus. She diagnosed me and sent me to a doctor where I went in antidepressants. About 6 weeks later, and I feel back to normal. Better, actually. Looking back, it's pretty clear I've probably had anxiety since I was a teenager, but just didn't realize. Turns out, you're supposed to want to get out of bed and live your life. Last thing, I always thought I just had bad self-control and no discipline. I thought I was just fat and gross. Nope, binge eating disorder. Still working on that. I think this stems from a need for control, a bad coping mechanism, and body issues since I was child brought on from comments from adults. Growing up, you're taught that only really skinny people have eating disorders. Nope. Story 9 from user OK, yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm the patient here. 3 years ago, I had begun to bruise terribly easy, and when I bled, it took a long time to stop. I thought that this was normal, and it didn't happen enough to draw real concern. Fast forward a few months, I developed these little red spots all over my legs and sometimes my arms and face. I was terribly self-conscious about them and tried everything to get rid of them, shaving more carefully, moisturizing regularly, etc. I had just thought I was shaving my legs wrong, or they were just sunspots. Few more months later, while I was changing, I noticed a massive bruise on my hip. This thing was about the size of a softball and looked like I had been hit by a car. I had no idea where I got it, so at my next doctor's appointment I brought it up and, yeah, he was concerned, especially since I had no pain. He said if it happens again, I need to get blood work. It did, and I got it done. We got a call just 2 hours after we left the clinic saying that I needed to go to the hospital immediately because my platelet count was 9,000. Average is 150,000 plus. After a night of some treatment, the hematologist comes in and diagnoses me with acute ITP 2 years later, and I'm now considered chronic. So yeah, red spots and unexplained bruising is not normal. Thanks to everyone who was here today. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.